Hey everybody and welcome to this quick tutorial, top 5 tips and tricks, whatever it's gonna be called, I have no idea. It should be clear from the title what this is about, which is openers. Not specifically as to, oh, on this map we should go here and attack that, and on this map we should do this instead, and from that side, yada yada yada. That's not what this is about. This is more about general tips for like literally the first minute of the game, essentially. There was one comment recently asking me to do a video like that. I had that in the back of mind for honestly a few years now, every now and then, but I was always too lazy, honestly. But there was also, I recently watched a live gameplay from a tournament, and I realized, some of these tips, even people with quadruple digit hours of playtime in Wargame might, find this useful. Some of this, of course, many of it will be obvious to many of you, some of which might not. Some of which might be obvious to everyone, I don't know, but I'm just gonna say what I have to say. And if it's just useful to a small handful of people, it's still fine. So I'll show you the situation that prompted me to actually now get this video done. These three Zeldas are just gonna be, or three two stacks, they're gonna be standing in for the forces of the player I was watching. Essentially three different blobs. So of course it was more than just three two stacks, but it's just gonna be, you know, standing in for that. So this is essentially what happened. The game started. Let me just pause here. Imagine the game is starting now, and this is not like slow down. This is actually what I saw, more or less 1-to-1. I'm realizing that the timer on the right is not going, but that's essentially what I saw. That took 15 seconds for 3 fast move orders. 15 seconds. That's a lot in the opener. That is a lot. Of course, over the whole 40 minutes, that's not relevant, but for the opener itself, that's hugely important, right? 15 seconds? Like, let's just take a look, right? At 35, the Zeldas were around here. Right, let's take a look where the Zelda is gonna be at 20 seconds of, at 39 minutes and 20 seconds, 15 seconds of fast move, right? That is this, distance. Meaning that if you're 15 seconds too late for driving here, your opponent might be able to just bridge that gap for free and get the town for free because, they spotted you're late with a helicopter or something and they realize, oh, I can just get this town, amazing, right? That's why I'm saying 15 seconds is a lot. If you're 15 seconds late with some reinforcements you buy later on throughout the game, probably not as big of a deal in most scenarios, but in the opener, that's a lot. So this is, that was what partially prompted this video. So I'm just gonna go through some general tips and tricks and small little tricks and whatnot, some more important than others, some very, very niche, etc, etc. But I'm just gonna try to cover everything that I think is at least somewhat important in some aspects. So let's start with one thing, right? In the case of highway, you have one big road, essentially, towards the front line. There's of course this, but in the grand scheme of things, you're never gonna need this very much. Similar to what I just showed, it's very often that you have you want some stuff here, some stuff in this area here, and maybe even there. So let's just assume we have 4 blobs of units. So I'm just gonna speed this up here. Abrams together with K1, Zeldas, Deckungsgruppe and that, and I don't know, more Abrams, more Rovite, and I don't know, some CSs for some reason, right? These are 4 blobs. So the first thing that I notice is they're a good bit apart. It's not really a huge deal. A lot of players, me included, they tend to have their blobs separated, of course. If you do that, do it somewhat like this. Keep them, if you can, on the road. Some people like to have one blob here, one blob there, one blob here, and one blob there. Of course, it's very easy to then maneuver them around. However, they all have to cross this off-road speed and then go onto the road. If you get really unlucky, they might get stuck on a forest bit and get detracked or stuck in the mud or something. So if you do that, separated slots, try to keep them at or right next to the road. It's typically much faster, plus your blob stays together. Off-road speed can vary a lot. Right, there's 55 and 75. If they both start here, and I give them the fast move command up there, the Abrams suddenly has a small head start. Not a huge deal, but sometimes it can be if your AA is too slow, or if you work with, let's say, an M36 with 40 kmh, something along those lines, bad. Still though, I would suggest that if you can, and this is just experience, try to still keep them a bit closer together. Those are still a lot of meters that you give up for free. Ideally, of course, would be if they're essentially all together. Of course, if you have a lot of the same unit but they all go somewhere else, it can be a bit tough to deal with. But what I like to do in that case is just, for example, let's just split them all up, right? I have a bunch of Abramses, right? Let's say I want one Abrams everywhere. First and foremost, I give every single blob a fast move into the general direction they're all going. I know they all go down this road, so just for the starters, give them all fast move command here. I'm gonna slow this down a bit because I'm gonna do this a lot more slower than I would do it in real time. Now let's say, alright, they're all fast moving now, and now I have a good amount of time to do exactly what I did at the start. You know, moving slowly, giving them exactly the order to the right forest bit, etc. Just, I'm not really giving up time because they're already moving towards the target. So let's say I want one Abrams here. What I do, it's not 100% ideal, and I explain in a second, but you make less mistakes, and that's, for me at least. I select all of my Abramses, right? What you can do is you select all the units and then press Control, left click on whichever unit you want selected, which is in this case the Abrams. What you can also do is double click, although I find it's very prone to making mistakes or misclicking, or just again Control and then left click on that. I select them all, and then I tell, in this case, all of them fast move here. Then I deselect one, which is done by Shift left click. And now I have 3 selected, right? Fast move here. Once again, deselect one, fast move there, and then you either deselect one or select the last one, doesn't matter. Fast move here. Now all 4 Abramses have their own command without like standing still while I give those commands. Of course, sometimes you have a bit less time to do that because let's say you might want these guys to move down this road, in which case obviously you want to give those their order a bit earlier. And of course, on other maps you have more than just one road, in which case you'd have a blob here and a blob there, etc, etc. But I'm just giving you a general idea of what I'm doing, what you probably should do. If you want to be more efficient, a tiny bit more efficient, or a tiny bit faster rather, what you can do is when you have something selected, you press Tab. Oh, that only works like this. This doesn't work with individual units actually, so if I have only CSs selected, this doesn't work. But if I have all of these selected and I press Tab, you can see that this K1 now has like this white border around it. If I press Tab again, all CSs have, then all the Abramses, all Mothers, going through the list here. Pretty obvious, right, what it's doing. And if this happens, then you've only these specific units selected, right? In this case, technically, it might look like I have all of the units here selected, but actually, if there's this white border around, through pressing Tab, only these CSs are gonna get that order. See? Pressing, only CSs are moving. I press Tab again, now it's the Abrams, now it's the Marder 1s, there's the MX-13. Despite it looking like I have everything selected, press Tab again, all the Zeldas, and press Tab once more, nothing is selected. This is technically more efficient, assuming of course you want all, at least in some cases, the same units of one type to go together. However, I don't like doing that. For one, it's just not in my muscle memory, and two, I'm always scared that I don't properly read which one is highlighted, which one isn't, or I press tab once too many, or one too few times, etc., etc. That's why I just don't do it. But it is an option. Some people do it like that, and again, in some areas, this is more efficient because every time you give a fast move command while the unit is already fast moving, you're actually slowing it down by a bit because the unit gets a new order, and to process this order, it's actually gonna briefly use its off-road speed before using its on-road speed again, right? I have this cell at the front selected, and I'm just gonna give it multiple fast move commands still in the same direction, right? And just look how it's gonna slowly move back because the unit is do normal speed. Always processes, and now it's sped up again. Now let's give me, I'm gonna give it a new order, and a new order, and a new order, and slowly each time getting pushed back. It's not a huge deal, but that's why, doing this, deselect, new shift, fast move command, slightly slows them down a bit. Technically, it would be best if you did like something like this instead, right? But of course, it's more prone to errors, etc., etc. Now, this is thing number one. Selections and essentially giving your units orders while they're already driving towards the front line. I think that is one of the most important parts of openers, is first tell them all the fast moves so they're all moving, and then give them the detailed orders. I know I rambled about this for like 12 minutes now, but I just have to stress how important this is, because I just keep seeing players, even like higher end players with a lot of experience, needing like 20 seconds for their opener, like for some of the units to even start moving. And again, if you move those units to the front line, right, that is a lot of time you're giving up. Okay, that is that. Now let's move on to shift commands. Shift commands are very, very useful. In case you don't know what shift commands are, essentially you can queue up orders, any order really outside of stop orders, for units. Let's say I hold shift, I keep holding shift, and I right click here and there and reverse and forward and reverse and forward and reverse, right? And because I held down shift, those orders are gonna be done one after the other in the order that I gave them, right? I'm not doing anything, but you'll see it move forward in a bit and exactly do what I just told it to do. That is of course very useful. It is not very precise because units will this Abrams you will see is not gonna like get to the point where I told it to and immediately with the same full speed then turn. It's actually gonna decelerate, essentially come to a halt, and then do the next order, right? Especially if you tell the Abrams to move, let's say, to this point, and at that point, that's actually quite a slowdown. That plus units like to move to cover, right? Let's say I'm gonna tell it to move here. And you will see that the Abrams is gonna, yep, it's actually gonna go to cover, right? And it's the same thing with fast moving and shift commands, etc. That's why they're not very precise. You have to keep in mind shift commands are not precise. What they are very, very good for, though, is a safety net for your transports, especially for your transports. Let's say I have, again, just get 4 Zeldas here, right? And I want them to unload here, 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 and here in the opener. Now, typically, if you want your stuff to be unloaded in the front line, it's somewhat difficult sometimes to forget them, but if it's like on the other side of the map where you don't necessarily expect the push, but it's still important for them to be unloaded there, or something like that, it can sometimes be easy to forget, right? So what you just do is, I have them all selected. I'm gonna do the same thing with the Abrams again. Fast move here, hold shift, unload, deselect, get rid of shift, fast move here, hold shift, unload, get deselect one, get rid of shift, fast move here, shift, unload, deselect one, get off of shift, and the same thing here, and shift, unload, right? And that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna fast move there, get to a halt, unload. The reason why I definitely think that this is more of a safety net, right? Because, for example, this one you could have unloaded a bit earlier. Here, it didn't really save a lot of time to do it manually, but in some situations, it really, really might be a good bit longer. Sometimes they drive in front of the building because there's a bit of cover the unit wants to go to and then unload. Obviously, that's not very safe, especially near the front line. For example, now I would unload manually, but it's still driving forward. It's gonna drive around the building, get into this bush, and now unload, right? That's what I mean with it's a safety net. If you can, it's essentially always faster to do all of the things manually and not rely on shift commands. But obviously that's not always practical, that's not always realistic, people forget, or suddenly you get attacked on another flank and you forgot on some of about some of the forces on the other side of the map. That's what shift unload is most useful for. Same thing goes for driving around the map or something, right? In this case, of course, it would be perfectly, and I would do it myself, if you want to drive something around the map here and you know, obviously it doesn't matter if it arrives 30 seconds later or something in this case, then obviously I would like shift here, shift there, and then shift here, because obviously if I told this Zelda to just fast move there, it would go down the highway instead of driving and sneaking around, which I would want to. And that's also the reason why, you know, don't give your units, if you can avoid it, like a shift move here and then shift move up there, because I'll show you just what happened. You might guess it from the Abrams, and you might also guess it from that match on Hell in a Very Small Place against, what was it, against Landshut. It's just really slowing you down. If you do an important push that, you know, goes around the curve, where you don't want to take the main road, make sure you do it manually. Again, most importantly on stuff like Hell in a Very Small Place, where you want to drive around that side island. Make sure we don't win this game by conquest or something. Peace. Right, so let's take these Zeldas, split them up so they're not individual units. And let's say I want them to move here, but I want to definitely avoid them to, you know, use this route for some reason. I want them to drive down here and then up there, right? So I'm gonna shift, fast move here, shift, fast move there. And you'll see in just a second what happens. Right, so in an ideal situation, by now I would tell them to fast move here, because now the obvious fastest route would be to just continue driving there and then fast move up here. But by using shift, I told them to fast move here, shift, fast move there, yeah? By holding shift, you know, and because there's so many individual units, the game will spread them, wants to spread them around in a checkerboard formation, but because there's cover, yep, it just stopped there in cover, this one stopped in the open, and now they're getting their new command, which is fast moving up here. They move up here even, comes to halt, now gets the new order, comes to halt, now gets a new order, right? It's obviously a shit show, not very good at all. And that's why, for one, you should avoid queuing move orders in the front line anyway, but most importantly, avoid it with multiple units at once, because that screws it up even more on top of slowing it out in general. If you just did it with one unit, it would probably, I don't think near the highway, but, you know, stop here and then move up. But now they're spread around. They're essentially like two individual groups, because one group stopped here, the other one like on there, right? That's obviously not ideal. What it does work reasonably well with, though, is, of course, for one, if you just want to sneak it around the map, and if you're sneaking with helicopters, or even unloading helicopters in the front line as well. Obviously, the same thing goes for helicopters too, with unloading near the front line. Most of the time, it's faster with doing it manually, but not as big of a deal, because obviously they don't try to attach themselves to cover. But it is certainly very, very common, and I would always suggest doing that, to do this if you fly around with a helicopter that way or something, which happens a lot more often, I think, than doing it with the ground transport. But the same thing goes here again. It is slower than if you did it manually, right? So let's take this Puma. tell it to like move here, shift, move there, 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 and then here, right? So let's see what this does. And I know you probably already guessed what it does, but I still want to just showcase it to show how this works and why it's not ideal if you want to be completely optimal. But of course, again, if you're doing around the flank or you expect, just want to be sneaky and 30, 50, 60 extra seconds don't matter, whatever. But of course, it's decelerating, stopping. We even saw it like quickly power. I know it was change altitude, and then doing your new order, right? Same thing as with ground transports. But once again, um, it's a safety net, right? Let's say you do this in the opener, you tell them dump, dump, bam, unload. And if you're busy at getting attacked here, then it's still gonna be done, albeit a bit slower than if you did it manually, and not forgotten instead. I think that's most of the practical things done. 20 minutes. I thought it would be a 10 minutes video. But there's still some general things I want to go over. For one, unit labels. In the interface settings, I have, in case you're wondering, the European escalation settings. Icons type doesn't matter because with European escalation settings, the only thing it affects is the thing on the unit card. Default setting is kind of obviously Red Dragon. I don't know how many of you play with this, but that's a difference, right? This is what it would look like if I had it set to Red Dragon. I hate this. I absolutely do. Why do I hate this? Mainly because of the label merging like this, right? All of these units, you can see the small circles, are more or less in the same situation, right? Position, excuse me. But if I zoom out, and I try to play as zoomed out as possible to get the best overview, all I see is this. I have no idea if like this group is maybe here and this group is maybe there or something. Very, very hard to notice. You can adjust this, like if you set it to custom, for label merging to be very minimal, right? Is that what it does? I'm honestly unsure which one it really is. I think label merging like this vertical is no. Honestly, I don't. Where's the label merging thing? Oh, labels merging. There it is. Never or soft. Oops, sorry. Right? Just experiment with it. You saw this one it didn't merge anymore, but it was merged before the K1 and Zelda, right? Do it again, back to Red Dragons. Right, like, look, if I'm a bit back here, yeah, they are so far apart, right? But I would not know if the K1 is maybe, and both of them are like together in this bush, when really, look how far they are apart. Obviously, if you're a bit closer, it's not as big of a deal, but that's just why I prefer European escalation setting. Of course, it's by no means perfect either, right? It's very hard for me to know what is, if are those all Zeldas? Is there something else in between, right? Everything has its downside. Just, I would like to encourage you to try it out for yourself. And do whatever feels best, but just be aware that there are options, right? It's not just Red Dragon and European escalation settings. You can customize it however you want. For example, I don't really need the symbols at all. All I want is a number, because I recognize by name virtually any unit by now. And then in general, and that goes for obviously for any map, be aware what you get for free. What I mean with that, which positions do you quote unquote get for free? For example, this is sort of a free town for me, and this for my opponent. Why? What I mean with free, rather, if both of us have a 110k mage transport, I will arrive here and my opponent arrive there more or less at the same time. Right? I will not get there before my opponent. Of course, assuming we both essentially start more or less at the same time. If we both have 150k mage, I get this for free, and this my opponent. Same with like the same helicopters of the same speed. But of course, also be aware, if you send a 110 kmh transport, or everything you send here is 110 kmh on the road, you might have to be aware that if your opponent sends something wheeled or a helicopter, they might try to grab at this if they notice you don't have something of that speed of yourself, right? So just be aware where you have to expect your opponent if you're slow, or what you might be able to get for free, quote unquote, if your opponent is slow, of course, right? So if you have a recon helicopter there and you spot everything he has tracked, nothing wheeled, and you have something wheeled right here, it might be worth it to just tell this unit to not unload here, but actually drive a bit further forward and unload there. You know, what I mean, or why I'm saying this is because sometimes, especially obviously on less experienced players, I see them, they unload here, right? Even if there's nothing of the opponent there, but they feel like, oh, maybe I should expect a unit here already, right? Sometimes you should, maybe, but that's what recon is for, and that's what map knowledge is for. Watch replays and see how far did my opponent go, or rather, watch the first 2 minutes of the game and see, okay, where were my units at that point? Where were my opponent's units? How far could I have gone up further before I even get in range of any of my opponent's units? I think this is somewhat obvious, but these are the most important things really about map knowledge. It's not so much about, oh, from this point I can get a really good angle on that. Sure, that's very good to know, but it's a lot more important to know what do you get for free in the opener. Never like, you know, don't be prepared to defend this line, because then you just give your opponent this, even like this whole zone for free. That's obviously not intended either. These zones are generally speaking good indicators as well, right? They're clearly central zones, which are essentially meant to be contested. So you can very roughly expect this to be quote unquote for free for you, and this for your opponent. And you know, in this situation here, there's no central zone, so you can expect this whole zone to be yours and this your opponent's, right? Of course, if your opponent starts with an MI-17 and all you send here are M113s, your opponent will just be able to unload here before your track transports will be in range. I think that hopefully goes without saying. But just make sure, if you have trouble, especially on certain maps, make sure to just watch a replay, watch someone else play, even, you know, where do they unload very often, even without like having any recon nearby, right? Um, these are things that are very crucial to know, and ideally you will just get used to them, and like they will be in the back of your mind, and you don't even have to think twice about it. Yeah, that again took much longer than anticipated, but I think that's kind of how my videos go anyway. Still, hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something most importantly, and I will hopefully see you next time. Oh yeah, and let me know if I missed something or if you have any more questions. You know, if there's some very obvious things that I just didn't cover, I might just do like a 5-minute addendum or something. Yeah. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.